Here we're going to talk through the differences between generally accepted auditing standards and generally accepted governmental auditing standards. I want to make sure everyone's aware this could be a confusing point for you, and you wouldn't be alone. These are the auditing standards that the auditor follows, right? Generally accepted auditing standards and governmental auditing standards. You, as the auditor, follow these. You do not follow GAAP. Let me repeat that. GAAP is what the financial statements follow. The financial statements are prepared in conformity with GAAP. Your job is to follow auditing standards to make sure that the financial statements are produced and maintained in conformity with their applicable reporting framework. That could be confusing. You have GAAP, GAAS. That is a trick I've seen in multiple choice questions, is to say, oh, the auditor should follow GAAP. Nope, auditor should not follow GAAP. Who maintains these and who develops these? Well, the governmental auditing standards is through the Governmental Accountability Office, and GAAS is through the AICPA, good old AICPA. As I mentioned before, the GAGAS is also referred to as the yellow book, so that's something you may see in multiple choice questions. And we are going to use this when performing single audits, governmental audits. A CPA or audit firm will also use GAGAS when conducting performance audits used to evaluate the performance of a program or a project. Now, this is what we'd see throughout the rest of the exam. It's just GAAS, but we'll go over it here as well. When we use governmental auditing standards, generally accepted auditing standards, we are going to be using this essentially part of the AICPA authoritative literature, this rule book on how we should conduct our audit. It's going to say you need to document everything. It's going to say this is how you should communicate with the client. This is built up off of 10 standards, which you don't have to memorize, just there for your own knowledge. This provides a general framework for how an auditor should conduct the audit. Standards provide guidance on the performance of the audit, the responsibilities, so really just how you're going to do your job. This is the rule book and how you do your job. Preparation of the report, evaluation of the results. Generally accepted auditing standards is intended to ensure that the audit is performed in accordance with professional standards and our key phrase, reasonable assurance that we're free from material misstatement. Good old auditing standards, important points to keep in mind. Now, let's talk about differences there. I mean, we kind of talked about it a little bit. The primary, most obvious difference is the usage. When are you going to use them? Well, generally accepted auditing standards applies to private and public businesses, while GAGAS is used for governmental agencies and entities. They're quite similar, but there are differences. Whoever governs them is different. Now we've got the FASB and GASB. So for every corporate and public private business entity, there's a governmental entity for it. So we have the normal standard, the auditing standards, and then we've got the governmental auditing standards. We've got the Financial Accounting Standards Board, and we've got the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. We've got the AICPA, and we've got the Government Accountability Office. While GAAS is through FASB, GAGAS is through GASB. GASB defines standards for state and local government organizations, and the Federal Accounting Standards Advisory Board regulates the financial reporting standards for federal government agencies. So really the one you need to know is GASB. Lastly, and most importantly, GAGAS standards implicitly bake in the idea of internal controls. And this is where we've seen a difference, is because there's a little extra you need to do if you're doing a governmental audit. You're concerned about internal controls, accountability, because these are governmental organizations. If you're going to do that for a corporate organization, you're going to do an integrated audit. So, and this is not a one-for-one, but I'm kind of just saying it. You can kind of think of governmental audits more similar to integrated audits than a normal audit. Now, that's just take that with a grain of salt, but that's kind of the idea we're coming across here. Under GAAS standards, a lack of internal controls in a company will prompt additional audit testing to ensure compliance. We want to make sure, especially these governmental organizations, are complying with the rules and the laws. While lack of internal controls by GAGAS standards is completely unacceptable. However, with audit, as we'll see, and as you may have seen already, with our testing, internal controls can be an absolute mess, and there's a whole, we gotta talk about what would happen there. However, if the financial statements are free from material misstatement and the numbers are correct, we can give a clean opinion. We've got some extended responsibilities that you can think of. GAGAS has the same responsibilities as GAAS, but then it's got extra responsibilities. Here are the expanded responsibilities. We've got additional responsibilities. Yes, yeah, GAGAS says, okay, follow these, but also some additional rules. Yes, it is its own set of rules, and it doesn't say, oh, follow this and then some more rules. No, it just incorporates a lot of the same rules within itself. What is one of our first extended responsibilities? Well, the auditor is charged with obtaining reasonable and not absolute assurance. Whenever you see the word absolute, 9 times out of 10, unless it's a except for question. I mean, this is anytime you see absolute or anything definitive, that's a red flag there. Reasonable assurance that the financial statements are free of material misstatement that have a direct and material effect on the financial statements, not completely free of any misstatements. Right, this is what you're going to do under GAGAS, and this is pretty in line with what you would do with Generally Accepted Auditing Standards as well. The auditor's responsibilities, including obtaining and understanding the possible effects of the financial statements of laws and regulations. This is a little more specific to GAGAS that are generally recognized to have a direct and material effect on the determination of financial statement amounts. The auditor must obtain sufficient evidence to form an opinion on compliance. This is specific to GAGAS, conformity with that auditing standards. Upon discovery that an entity requires the expanded auditing procedures and reporting that result from the entity's receipt of governmental financial assistance, the auditor must communicate to management and the audit committee that an audit in accordance with GAAS may not be sufficient. If we need to conduct these additional responsibilities because we see a need for it because of these particular situations, this is how we're going to conduct it. Some more expanded additional responsibilities. Some of these are going to overlap, but these are ones that you would explicitly see in some questions. So, hey, I want to make sure you see them. The auditor should obtain a written management representation letter. These would possibly be answers in a sim or multiple choice questions, so make sure you know them. The auditor will not express an opinion regarding the effectiveness of internal control over compliance. So that's a big one there. Not internal control over compliance. We are going to be concerned with internal control over the financial statements, but not compliance with laws and regulations. The report on compliance and report on internal control over compliance may be either separate or combined. These are just points, which again, you may just see in multiple choice questions. And lastly, responsibility for identification of laws and regulations with compliance requirements rests with management. Just like in normal auditing, management's responsible for everything. Management's responsible for the fair presentation of the financial statements. They're responsible for correcting any issues. You, as the auditor, do not have that responsibility. All your responsibility is to make sure that your opinion is based on solid auditing, is to make sure you've done your job and you have reasonable assurance. Management is then charged with designing appropriate controls to ensure compliance. While the auditor is responsible for obtaining an understanding of laws and regulations, management is in charge of following them. So, an auditor should understand the laws and regulations that the organization needs to follow, but it's management's job to make sure that they're being followed. You're not hiring the auditor to make sure that you're compliant. You're hiring the auditor to see if there's an issue and help management be in compliance. But it is management's responsibility at the end of the day. I'm going to read this again because I kind of went off on a little tangent. While the auditor is responsible for obtaining an understanding of laws and regulations, generally recognized to have a direct and material effect on the financial statements, the auditor is primarily charged with assessing if management has properly identified these applicable laws and regulations with compliance requirements. Again, it is management's responsibility, and the auditor's responsibility is to make sure that management's doing that. But at the end of the day, if management's not doing that and we don't catch them, we've done enough work and we have reasonable assurance, it still is on management. Hey there, are you ready to not only pass your CPA exams, but truly understand and enjoy the material while studying? I know it seems impossible, right? Especially to enjoy the material? We'll do it together. Tap into the power of CPA.examprep.ai, where we've got personalized quizzes, multiple choice questions, memorization guides, flashcards, simulations, all tailored to your learning. Our adaptive study planning puts you on the fastest path to success and lifts you back up if you fall behind. Avoid wasting your precious time and money attempting an exam with a low chance of passing, because who wants that? We want to get you through this process as quick as possible. Our exam readiness prediction lets you walk in with confidence, knowing that you're prepared for success on exam day. Thankfully, there's no payment method needed to get started, so why don't you come join us? Visit cpa.examprep.ai and let's achieve your exam success together.